Hello everyone and welcome to my first deep dive on this channel. My name is Constanza Eliana Chinea and I am a journalist, a producer, and an activist. And I make videos every single week about social, political, and racialized issues that affect people all over the world. This video is brought to you by my Patreon members who actually saw a much shorter version of this video way back in November, and they helped me to create videos like this. So shout out to all my members. Over the last few months, I have been keeping up with the news coverage of the Astroworld and Rust movie set tragedies. The two men at the forefront of these events, Travis Scott and Alec Baldwin, have been held to very different standards. Both of them have been heavily reported on in the news and in social media, but one thing I began noticing is a strikingly familiar tone that activists of color have been talking about for a while, and that is media bias. One thing I want to note in this analysis is that I believe it's pretty clear that both Astroworld and Rust do have people at fault for negligence, Travis and Alec included. And enough information has been gathered at this point to help me come to that conclusion. That doesn't mean, however, that both events have been covered with equal weight by the media and the public, which is what this video is meant to show. So with that said, let's continue. From the get-go, Alec Baldwin, a white Hollywood actor, had really been given the benefit of the doubt, with headlines claiming that it was an accident and a tragedy. On the other hand, Travis Scott, who is a black rapper, had been portrayed fairly negatively from the start. According to our trusted Wikipedia, media bias is defined as the bias of journalists and news producers within the mass media in the selection of many events and stories that are reported on and how they are covered. The term media bias implies a pervasive or widespread bias, contravening the standards of journalism, rather than the perspective of an individual journalist or article. Since the immediate and initial outrage fizzled and more information started coming to light, Alec's coverage has actually begun to change, but that's only months after the incident compared to the immediate backlash that Travis Scott received. For Travis, almost immediately controversies began to spread about things like demonic possession and devilish behavior. His past actions have been heavily scrutinized from the very beginning and deemed as examples of a negative pattern of behavior in the span of just a single week.
Scott concert was a clear representation of the devil overplaying his hand. As you can see in these pictures here, we know exactly what type of scenario Travis Scott was trying to emulate, and it was not of God. It was very demonic.
As opposed to Alec Baldwin, on the other hand, who has been portrayed as the victim in his incident and whose violent and racist past has been completely left out of the conversation.
You guys gotta get out of the middle of the
You don't have the brains or the decency as a human being. I don't give a damn that you're 12 years old or 11 years old or that you're a child. I am going to get on a plane and I'm going to come out there for the day and I'm going to straighten your ass out.
The coverage on Alec was much less often and much less aggressive than what we saw against Travis. This type of media bias is heavily influenced by race, both in the news and in social media. Even in the case of missing or murdered people, an entire term had to be created to explain why people of color don't get the same level of attention as white people do. Missing white woman syndrome, for instance.
We can go back and see this trend in the media even before the rise of social media. For example, the John Benet Ramsey case. That came before Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, yet it was still in the news everywhere.
In the case of Travis, who is a young black rapper and generally seen as arrogant or aggressive, whose style of trap music is really heavily demonized by the white majority, is experiencing a drastically different level of coverage than that of Baldwin, a white man who has been praised for his acting, received awards, and is constantly applauded for his skills and achievements. So why exactly is this an issue? Outside of the very obvious racism, bias actually takes away the focus from the deeper conversations that we need to be having around these incidents in the first place. In both cases, these events have actually happened before. In fact, around the same time period even. In the 90s, for example, Diddy put on an event where a stampede killed 9 people.
And in 1991, there was the Heavy D and Puff Daddy celebrity basketball game.
City College tragedy. And it was a glass door that they were crowded at in the glass door, and people were steady pushing the people through the door. The glass broke and people fell through the glass doors. They got trapped downstairs through the second door because Jessica had got scared. That was Puffy's partner at the time, Jessica Rosenberg. She got scared, ran downstairs with the money box and shut the door behind her. And all those people got shut down in there and got trapped.
And around that same time, the actor Brandon Lee was fatally shot on the set of The Crow.
Around midnight on March 31, 1993, during production of The Crow in Wilmington, North Carolina, Massey was supposed to shoot Lee with a Smith & Wesson Model 629. When Massey pointed the weapon and fired, a bullet struck Brandon Lee in the abdomen and lodged in his spine. Lee was rushed to a hospital where he would die just after 1 p.m.
So this brings up the fact that both incidents could have actually been prevented, and yet 20 years later, we still haven't implemented enough change to stop these accidents from actually happening in the first place. In the case of Diddy, it took 7 years for the courts to make a ruling.
A judge actually placed 50% of the blame on the people's deaths on the City University of New York and 50% on the promoters, which is Heavy D and Puffy and Jessica Rosenberg. But I don't think anyone actually went to prison or anything else like that over that.
No, I don't think so.
In the case of The Crow, no charges were ever filed, not even against the crew.
An investigation into Lee's death found that the crew was negligent. However, no criminal charges were filed. According to the New York Times in September 1993, the district attorney said while negligence was a factor in the case, there was no evidence to prove criminal wrongdoing.
Since I began covering this story, both men have sat down publicly to speak on their experiences and to also defend themselves. Travis sat down with Charlemagne the God on December 9th of 2021, while Alec did his interview just a few days earlier with ABC on December 2nd, 2021. In preparation for making this updated video, I went on my social media and I did a poll on my audience to see, how people felt about this whole situation in the first place. When I asked, do you feel the media has been more negative to Travis or equal compared to Baldwin? 86% said more negative and 14% said equal. On the opposite side, when I asked, was the coverage on Baldwin more or less favorable after his ABC interview, 74% said it was more favorable versus 26% said less. From what I saw, people had a really negative reaction to Travis Scott's interview, saying that he looked and sounded like a liar and that he had been likely coached by a PR team. And the reaction to Alec was pretty mixed. Some saying that they actually felt bad for him and that it confirmed that this was truly an accident. What I find interesting is that not too many people have done an analysis as to why that is. Alec began crying almost immediately at the beginning of his interview. ABC edited the music and the vibe to be really somber and even made a montage of all of the movies that he was speaking about when he broke down fully about how much he loved making movies with famous actors. Alec was really humanized in this interview, given grace even. On the other hand, Travis sat down with an already controversial person who isn't widely known outside of the Black and brown community. People actively criticize Charlemagne for attempting to humanize and empathize with Travis, which is really a stark difference from the Alec interview. And we could actually do an entire video just on the bias against Black men who speak and articulate themselves in a certain way, like a trap rapper from Houston, Texas does. Black men are demonized constantly for looking like thugs and the way that they speak as being unintelligent and ignorant. We truly live in an anti-Black society that implicitly is biased against Black folks who don't present themselves in the same way as educated, successful white folks do. Now, that's not to say that I personally don't think Travis isn't responsible for his role in the tragedy that occurred at his concert. To me, it's pretty clear that both men are responsible for negligence in their own right. Both men are responsible for their actions. But when the media really focuses more heavily on Travis's faults and completely dismisses Baldwin's as merely an accident, we move away from implementing the real change that actually needs to be enacted in both cases.
This is just, it's outrageous. The only reason he's not arrested is because he's Alec Baldwin. If it had been me, you, anybody else, you'd have been in jail by now. For him to hold a weapon in his hand and to not clear or check it, and that it had live ammo in it, and then he points it at a human being and squeezes the trigger, I'm sorry. That's not an accident either, by the way.
Event and movie set protocols need to be the focus and the priority just as much as individual responsibility does. Concerts and movies aren't made just by the headliner or the producer. There are hundreds of people involved, and they should have all of the skills and all of the resources to create a safe environment and the agency to speak up when they see potentially dangerous situations. The culture in both industries need to change from don't complain and just do your job to one that actually values workers, their opinions, and the safety of everyone involved. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this analysis. If you found value in it, you can let me know by liking this video and commenting below. You can also check out all of the links that I have below to support me on Patreon, to also buy some merch, sign up for my newsletter, or you can take one of my courses like Unpacking Identity Dismantling Power, where I go over anti-oppression principles and I introduce decolonial theory. That class is a student favorite, and I would personally love to hear your thoughts in the Anti-Oppression Social Club, which is my community app, and it's linked below. Thanks again so much to my Patreon members. I truly couldn't do this without you. And you'll be getting additional resources and my script that I used for this very video. So stay tuned for that. I will be back with another video next week. So until then, stay critical. See you later.